Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, chances of a government shutdown fester as partisan politics and influence from President-elect Trump hamper budget negotiations in Congress. Veteran Republican Congressman Patrick McHenry weighs in on the state of play on Capitol Hill as he departs Washington.
Frankly, we're in a situation where basic governance that is like turning the light switch on in the morning is complicated.
And the spread of the bird flu raises safety concerns among dairy farmers and their workforce.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. House Republicans are pushing a new proposal tonight to avoid a government shutdown in an effort to meet President-elect Donald Trump's last-minute spending demands. It's all unfolding after Mr. Trump rejected the original bill earlier this week, with billionaire Elon Musk leading the charge against it online. Our Lisa Desjardins has the latest and joins us now. Lisa, it's good to see you. So what did Republicans change in this last-minute revision?
This has been another whirlwind of a day here on Capitol Hill, and a pivotal one both for government function itself and also for Speaker Mike Johnson. Let me go over the bill that Speaker Johnson and House Republicans unveiled just over an hour or so ago. Here's what's in it. It would extend government funding for another 3 months. It would add billions in funding, about $100 billion in funding for disasters, including recent hurricanes. Now, this is new. It would extend the debt ceiling for 2 additional years. The debt ceiling is likely to hit in the spring of next year in the Trump administration. It would also extend the Farm Bill for 1 year. That debt ceiling extension was something specifically that President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect Vance had asked for, and it was not on the negotiating table until President-elect Trump brought it up. Today, President-elect Trump posted on social media that he, in fact, does support this new version of the bill. As you see there, he wrote, "All Republicans and even Democrats should do what is best for our country and vote yes." Now, as details were emerging, as I say, just in the last couple of hours, Jeff, members and the press, we were all trying to get our hands around what was happening. And some of the members who were skeptical about the original continuing resolution, the funding deal, said they were waiting eagerly and they were still deciding as they were hearing these first details about the bill itself and also about Speaker Johnson. Listen.
How he handles it will define who he is, if he's a serious leader, and if he's going to survive this leadership vote, quite frankly.
Now, that's Congressman Rich McCormick, and I have an important update. As I said, that was just over an hour ago or so that I talked to him. And just in the past few minutes, our producer, Kyle Madura, spoke to Rich McCormick again after he heard Speaker Johnson's sort of plea about this bill. McCormick says he is a hard no on Speaker Johnson's bill. He is furious about it, and he seems to have a problem with Speaker Johnson as well. We're hearing other Republicans who have concerns about it. They don't like the debt ceiling extension that President Trump personally campaigned for in this.
So what's the whip count looking like overall? I mean, the House is voting on it this evening. Is this expected to pass?
All right, so Speaker Johnson is using a special technique here to call up this vote quickly. He's going to have to go around the rules. To do that, he needs 2/3 of the entire House. Some math on that, that's about 286 votes. So he clearly is going to need Republicans. He does have some problems, or sorry, he's going to need Democrats rather. He does have problems with some of his Republicans. Democrats, they are hard-nosed. They say that this is a matter of Johnson and Republicans breaking their word. They also say this is billionaires trying to control Congress. Now, they feel, as I spoke to, or as we heard from Rosa DeLauro, the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, they want to stick with the original deal that they negotiated with Speaker Johnson. Here's what she said earlier.
I support the current bill that we have. I support that bill. I don't know what will decide. I support what we did. I worked very, very hard, as the other appropriators did in terms of creating this agreement. We lost some, they lost some, but we put together a good agreement that people could support. And we were there to support it, but for President Musk.
Now, where are we then, Jeff, at this moment? You know, by my understanding, I don't see how this bill has 2/3. I'm not quite sure it has a majority to pass the House. So with 1 day to go until a government shutdown, that means that either Johnson would have to fall back to some other vehicle that Democrats would agree with, or indeed, we are seeming to get closer and closer to a likely at least weekend or possibly holiday government shutdown.
And what might this mean for Speaker Johnson's leadership, Lisa?
Yeah, at this moment, it's not good, but we just have to wait in coming hours to see how he handles this. But I think what this means, more importantly to Americans, is very significant. If this disaster funding can't pass, those are millions of Americans around this country that are still recovering. I spoke to one of them, Asheville's Mayor Esther Manheimer, earlier today. She says people in Asheville, North Carolina are still homeless, waiting for SBA loans, as the SBA is out of money, waiting for this money right now. She says Congress needs to act immediately.
I feel like we're collateral damage all over again in a fight that has nothing to do with us, but has every bit a part of tearing us down. You've seen the devastation, and I know you know what the right thing is to do. And I need you all to come across the aisle, to compromise, to work with your fellow Congress people and pass a bill right before this Christmas holiday that will help Western North Carolina be able to manage itself through the storm and be as whole as possible several months from now.
Jeff, back to you.
Well, look, this chaos has a real impact, Lisa, and I know you've spoken to someone who has a unique perspective on that. Tell us about it.
I spoke earlier this week to Patrick McHenry, Congressman of North Carolina. He's been here 20 years and he is retiring. He knows all about this kind of chaos. Remember, he was the one who stepped in as acting speaker when Kevin McCarthy was ousted. And that was, again, also over fiscal discontent by some Republicans. As an example, earlier this week, he told me he thought Speaker Johnson had no problems. Today, I talked to him and he indicated things may have changed. I talked to him about Congress, about the Republican Party. And my first question to him was about this fiscal mess that we have right now, and why is it that Congress can't do basic things?
Frankly, we're in a situation where basic governance that is like turning the light switch on in the morning is complicated. And I think speaks to the dysfunction within our agencies of government, between the branches, and a lack of muscle memory on making these normal things happen. So overly complicated, and I don't see it quickly changing until we have systemic reform for how we fund the government.
In general, do you think Congress is broken or no?
Well, I think Congress is fundamentally a great place to get the people's business done. I think we're at a low ebb of functionality, and I think we're on the edge of really active legislating next Congress. I think the reform we need is to once again allow members of the House to be here in D.C. with their families. The best relationships I have from across the aisle are because of my kids and because of my wife. And those normal interactions we have.
The House Republican dysfunction we've seen this week is not new, as McHenry knows too well.
All right, now, you probably know what I'm going to show you, but I can't resist the opportunity. So, the moment.
Oh, yes.
Last fall, a small group of Republican rebels reacting to spending and debt deals then Speaker Kevin McCarthy negotiated sparked near fights on the floor and ousted him. McHenry was named as acting speaker. The moment he took the gavel became iconic.
Remember this? So
12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair.
it's been played a lot. What were you thinking then, and how significant does that feel now, looking back on it?
It's like I'm looking at someone else. Those minutes were like an out-of-body experience for me. First, my friend was just deposed from the speakership. We had 8 Republicans side with all the Democratic members. I understand why the Democrats voted the way they do, but the 8 selfish Republicans, you know, that was of particular, that really built anger. The wellspring of anger, which was the representation with the gavel.
You sound like you still feel something.
Yeah, I still feel it, and I'm trying to get to that moment and trying to put words to that moment. But it was anger at the situation, anger what these selfish 8 Republicans did to a speaker who had only been successful. Every engagement we had, for opening day through all those grueling votes to the negotiation of the debt ceiling and the deficit reduction and reforms we got attached to the debt ceiling, the success in passing the government funding bill.
And those were hard lifts, all of them.
Those are huge lifts for Speaker McCarthy. And for him to be successful and to be punished for that success, it was not fitting. I didn't have any other way to put words to it. I don't want to be in that position. I didn't want the House to be in this position. And I thought, this is the dumbest moment for the House that I've experienced. And there have been some pretty dumb moments.
President-elect Trump himself and some of his allies have put in a lot of pressure on senators right now to confirm his nominees. And there's a real conversation on the Senate side that you need to go along with what President-elect Trump wants. Are you concerned? There's been a clear shift from congressional to executive power over the course of several presidencies.
Well, it's Congress's will to weaken Congress's power, and they do so in a very short-sighted way if we hand over power. But in the case of the next president, he comes in with wide popularity in a significantly different position than 8 years ago, with deep support among the Republican Party and with the American electorate. I think there's a misunderstanding of President Trump. He will listen to people that tell him hard things. He does. And so you have people that don't understand him and try to sort of be sycophants for him. He doesn't like that. But to stand up for the rightful powers of the Congress, that should be a bipartisan issue, and that should be the case no matter who the president is.
What do Republicans stand for right now?
A strong economy and traditional American ways of life. And is there a tinge of populism that's in part of this stew? Yes, that's the case.
You are chairman of a powerful committee. Next session, 17 standing committees. House Republicans are leading them, and they will all be led by men. Does that matter that no women will be chairing committees next Congress?
You do need a diverse set of inputs. That was what the Founding Fathers intended for the nature of the House. And for us to have no women chairs of committees is a huge mistake and really an unfortunate thing, because we have powerful, smart, capable, tenacious Republican women that are capable of leading big committees and doing major things. That doesn't, it's not.
So what's going on here?
It's an unfortunate set of things, set of circumstances. I'm leaving Congress. So
you can tell me, yeah.
So,
put it out
me,
there. Is there still sexism within the Republican Party that needs to be dealt with?
We have a process through the steering committee. The steering committee produced these results, and that is for Republican members that made these decisions to answer for.
You entered Congress at the ripe old age of 29. How changed do you feel as a person?
Oh, I love this institution. I leave it with no remorse, no regret, but just gratitude, enormous gratitude. To be hitched to this great thing of the United States and what it means, not just to us here at home, but what it means around the globe. To be hitched to that, even for a moment, to serve our government, to serve our country, it's just been a great gift.
The bow ties happened here too.
They did. They did. So I get to be quirky and weird, and I've had a great run and really enjoyed everything about it.
Congressman Patrick McHenry, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Lisa.
The day's other headlines begin in Russia, where President Vladimir Putin held his annual year-end press conference. During the marathon session, more than 4 hours this year, Putin reaffirmed his commitment to continuing the war in Ukraine and hedged on the question of a potential arms race with the U.S. Stephanie Tsai reports.
An annual glimpse into the mind of Russia's strongman, complete with Cold War-era missile threats and denials that any of his policies have failed, including in Syria. That's despite the recent ouster of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who Putin backed during the 14-year civil war and who was forced to flee to Russia. Putin said he has yet to meet with Assad. With Moscow's influence in the region sharply curtailed and the future of its 2 military bases in Syria unknown, Putin dismissed any notion of defeat to an NBC reporter.
You and those who pay your salaries would like to present everything that is happening in Syria as some kind of failure, a defeat for Russia. I assure you it is not true. We maintain relations with all the groups that control the situation there, with all the countries in the region. The overwhelming majority of them tells us that they would be interested in keeping our military bases in Syria. I don't know. We'll have to think about it.
The Russian president also vowed to continue the war in Ukraine, agreeing to come to the negotiating table only if Ukraine submits to concessions.
We are ready to negotiate, but the other side needs to be ready for both negotiations and compromises.
Russia has captured over 26,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory since the launch of its full-scale offensive nearly 3 years ago. Ukraine has struggled to keep up with Russia's onslaught of manpower. Today, Ukraine launched 6 U.S.-made ATACMS and 4 British Storm Shadow missiles into Russia's Rostov region, almost all of which Russia said were shot down. Putin also alluded to turning up the heat in an arms race with the U.S., claiming that the new hypersonic Oreshnik missile recently used on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro cannot be intercepted by Western air defenses, despite analysts' claims to the contrary. He suggested a missile duel might be in order.
How about they propose to us to conduct some kind of technological experiment, a high-tech duel of the 21st century? Let them name some object, let's say in Kiev. Concentrate all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will hit it with Oreshnik and see what happens. We are ready for such an experiment.
With President-elect Trump set to take office in less than a month and promising to make a deal to end the war, Putin denied he would be in a weaker position when and if they do meet, and said they had not spoken in 4 years. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
Also today, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson returned to New York as he faces additional federal murder charges. It came just after suspect Luigi Mangione waived extradition in a court in Pennsylvania. That's where he was arrested while on the run earlier this month. Mangione was flown back to New York City this afternoon, where he'd already been indicted on state charges. He was taken to a federal court to face charges including 2 counts of stalking, 1 count of murder, plus a firearms offense. Manhattan's district attorney said that the state and federal cases could proceed simultaneously.
As we allege, the defendant in that case brazenly shot Mr. Thompson twice in Midtown Manhattan. It was targeted, premeditated, and meant to sow terror. Speaking generally, we've had state prosecutions and federal prosecutions proceed as parallel matters, and we're in conversations with our law enforcement counterparts.
One of Mangione's federal charges, murder by firearm, includes the possibility of the death penalty. Prosecutors have not said whether they'd seek that punishment. In Madison, Wisconsin, new details are emerging about the shooting this week at Abundant Life Christian School. Authorities say the 15-year-old suspect, who's accused of shooting and killing 2 people before shooting herself, brought 2 handguns with her to school that day. The individual had also been in contact with a man in California who authorities say was plotting a separate shooting at a government building. Earlier this week, a California judge issued a restraining order requiring him to turn in his weapons. And we're learning the identities of the victims. They are 14-year-old Ruby Patricia Vergara, who had attended Abundant Life since kindergarten, and 42-year-old Erin Michelle West, a teacher at the school. 2 other students are still in critical condition. Amazon workers at 7 facilities across the nation walked off the job this morning. They're aiming to pressure the retailer into contract negotiations during this busy holiday rush. The strikes are taking place at 7 Amazon warehouses in California, Illinois, New York, and Georgia.
Worker power! Worker power!
Workers were out well before the sun came up, forming picket lines by the dozens. They're demanding higher pay, better benefits, and safer working conditions. And they acknowledge that the timing could affect customers.
We don't want this to be something that makes the customer suffer. We want everybody to have a great Christmas, but we feel like Amazon has forced us into this. So whatever impacts we have, whatever packages are late, I just want everyone out there to remember that this is because Amazon's refusing to come to the bargaining table.
Amazon says the strikes will not affect its operations during the holiday period. Nearly 200 tons of food, water, and other aid arrived by Navy ship today to the devastated islands of Mayotte, 5 days after a massive tropical cyclone tore through the French territory. The deliveries coincided with a visit from French President Emmanuel Macron. At least 31 people are confirmed dead and more than 200 critically injured, but authorities fear the death toll is actually much higher. Reactions to Macron's visit were mixed, with some demanding more help.
Mayotte doesn't necessarily need your presence, but what Mayotte needs is your help, your support. What you spent in coming here from Paris to Mayotte would be better if you had used it to help the population.
Meantime, dramatic new footage has emerged of frantic scenes in the Pacific island nation of Vanuatu. People had to rush to safety after a 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck its capital on Tuesday. At least 10 people have been confirmed dead so far. That number is expected to rise as search crews from Australia, New Zealand, and France search through the rubble. The UN says nearly 1,000 people have been displaced. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mostly unchanged after yesterday's sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrial Average just barely managed to end in positive territory, adding 15 points. The Nasdaq slipped by nearly 20 points. The S&P 500 was little changed on the day. And we have a follow-up to a story we brought you last week. The oldest known complete stone tablet of the Ten Commandments has sold at auction for more than $5 million. The auction house Sotheby's had expected more like $1 to $2 million. The 155-pound marble slab is inscribed with the commandments in Paleo-Hebrew script and is believed to be about 1,500 years old. The buyer, who remained anonymous, plans to donate it to an Israeli institution. Still to come on the NewsHour, Georgia's district attorney is disqualified from the Trump election interference case. The legal tactics President-elect Trump is using against media outlets, and how researchers are trying to get people to rethink addiction as a brain disorder.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
A Georgia appeals court has disqualified the top prosecutor overseeing an election interference case against President-elect Donald Trump and his allies, a decision that could upend the case. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis was disqualified because she had a romantic relationship with an attorney she hired to help run the investigation. The decision overturns a lower court ruling earlier this year that said Willis could continue in the role. Our William Brangham has been following the legal cases against Mr. Trump and joins us now. So, William, what was the appeals court's argument in removing Fani Willis from this case?
Their argument, and I should say this came as a bit of a surprise because the presiding judge, as you said, Scott McAfee, who's a conservative appointed by Republican Governor Brian Kemp, had criticized Willis's relationship and said it created this appearance of impropriety, but said if you get rid of the man you're having a relationship with, you can stay on the case. She did that. This appeals court comes in and while agreeing that this was really just about an appearance of impropriety. They said that this case was so rare and so unusual that it, quote, that disqualification was mandated. Now, they've been criticized a fair amount for this ruling. It was a 2-to-1 decision. But that's the ruling, and she's off the case.
The underlying case, though, hasn't been dismissed. Could it be prosecuted by someone else, potentially?
Potentially. Fani Willis's office is appealing to the Georgia Supreme Court to overthrow this so she could get back in the driver's seat. Unclear if that's going to happen. If she loses that, then there's this Republican-led Council of Prosecutors in Georgia, and they will be the ones to decide, drop the case, continue the case, and then assign a new prosecutor to that. Unclear if that's going to happen or not. Hanging over all of this, though, is also this Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel policy, which says that no sitting president can be prosecuted. Now, Department of Justice, that's usually thought of as covering just federal cases, not state and local. But the belief among many legal experts is that state and local prosecutors would have to honor this as well. And so the other cases against, Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani, other people involved in this case could go forward. But there's just nobody really believes that a judge in Georgia would allow a case to go against Donald Trump when he's back in the White House.
So looking at the landscape of all of the cases that existed, I guess I use the past tense, existed.
That's the right tense.
That's right, yeah. I mean, which ones remain? Any of them?
No, the 2 federal cases against Donald Trump, we know Jack Smith has wound those down. The other one was dismissed. This case in Georgia, really in limbo. The only one that still has some legal maneuvers going on is the Stormy Daniels case. 34 felony convictions against Donald Trump in New York City. The judge just threw out Trump's attempt to say, hey, the Supreme Court just granted me immunity. I ought to be able to throw this case out. He said, no, not so fast. But he has postponed sentencing, perhaps not until Donald Trump is out of the White House.
William Brangham, our thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
We're going to shift our focus now to Donald Trump following through on his threats of legal action against the news media. Earlier this week, as we reported, ABC News agreed to pay $15 million to settle a defamation lawsuit brought by Mr. Trump, and the president-elect announced more was to come.
I feel I have to do this. I shouldn't really be the one to do it. It should have been the Justice Department or somebody else, but I have to do it. It costs a lot of money to do it, but we have to straighten out the press. Our press is very corrupt.
Following those comments, his legal team filed a lawsuit against Iowa pollster Ann Seltzer and the Des Moines Register for a poll released 3 days before the election, showing Vice President Kamala Harris leading by 3 points. Mr. Trump won the state by 13. His lawsuit called the poll election interfering fiction. Clay Calvert is a professor emeritus of law at the University of Florida and a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with this Iowa lawsuit, because unlike the now settled ABC News lawsuit, this is not about defamation, but about an accusation of consumer fraud under Iowa law. Help us understand this fairly novel approach.
Sure, it's definitely a novel approach. Typically, we would think of a defamation lawsuit filed by somebody who's been slandered or defamed. So what Trump is using here, it's a novel technique. He's using consumer fraud, consumer protection statutes that target unfair and deceptive business practices. And so what he essentially is suggesting that Ann Seltzer's polls here were fraudulently conducted. They were designed to harm his campaign. So it's a totally different use. Typically, we think of consumer protection laws as about products that you would buy at the store or the supermarket. Now we're talking about information and news. So regardless of his theory here, the First Amendment is certainly going to come into play as a constitutional overlay that would lend protection to the Des Moines Register, who is one of the defendants in this case.
And the Des Moines Register responded to the lawsuit in a statement, part of which reads this way. It says, "We stand by our reporting on the matter and believe this lawsuit is without merit." And Ann Seltzer spoke about this accusation before the lawsuit was filed in an interview with Iowa PBS. Here she is.
The idea that I intentionally set up to deliver this response when I've never done that before. I've had plenty of opportunities to do it. It's not my ethic. But to suggest without a single shred of evidence that I was in cahoots with somebody, I was being paid by somebody, it's all just kind of, it's hard to pay too much attention to it, except that they're accusing me of a crime.
In your view, is winning in court the real goal of this suit, or is something else at play here?
It's absolutely not to win in court. The real goal here is to chill the press, to have the news media engage in what we call self-censorship, to pull back their stories. So instead of playing a watchdog role, as typically we think of the fourth estate playing when it comes to government, what I think Trump is really trying to do is make the press be a lapdog, turn it into something that's not going to bark at him when he takes office again in 2025. So really the goal here is to chill the press, to try to scare them off from criticizing him. That's the larger purpose. It's what we would think of sometimes as a strategic lawsuit against public participation, or a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. The whole purpose here is designed to chill the press from participating in criticizing him.
Does the ABC News settlement, does it embolden more of these types of lawsuits, or is it potentially a way to protect press freedom? Because the thinking is, had it gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, the conservative majority on the court might have overturned the long-existing protections that were established under the New York Times versus Sullivan case back from 1964.
Well, certainly Justice Thomas has an appetite, as does Justice Gorsuch, for overruling the actual malice standard. So you wouldn't want to tee up a case to give the justices a crack at overruling the actual malice standard. I think one of the more interesting things with the Disney ABC settlement is particularly that you have a news division at ABC, but you also have this overlord by Walt Disney, an entertainment company. And so there's a real tension there when a news organization is controlled by a company that has other interests in the entertainment industry. And so I think that friction is very important. So a number of the officials at ABC News certainly didn't want that settlement to happen. But on the other hand, they're dictated and controlled by Disney.
At the moment, Donald Trump is still a private citizen, but in a couple of months' time, he'll be president again. He'll have control of the full weight and power of the Department of Justice. How should news organizations prepare?
I think they are preparing now. I'm a member of several different organizations where the media attorneys are members of that. And I know that they certainly are thinking about these issues. I think one of the other things we need to think about is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and Brendan Carr taking the chair position there, because Trump has threatened to revoke the licenses of stations, that he believes engage in fake news, deceptive news commentary. So we've got frontal attacks in terms of lawsuits, but also I'd watch out for the FCC and its actions in the future in terms of broadcast journalism.
Clay Calvert, non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for your time this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
In France today, a panel of judges found dozens of men guilty of raping a woman whose then husband had drugged her unconscious over the course of a decade. Ali Rogan has more, and a warning: the following conversation is graphic in its language.
Gisèle Pellicotte waived her right to a private trial in solidarity with other victims of sexual assault, whom she says go unrecognized.
By opening the doors to this trial, I wished for society to join in the debates that were held. I never regretted this decision.
For 3 months, she has had to sit through videos of her abuse in court, taken by her then husband, while dozens of men he recruited online assaulted her. A majority of these men said they didn't know it was rape, but all of them were found guilty in one way or another. The scale and brutality of Pellicotte's abuse prompted thousands to take to the streets and has sparked a nationwide conversation about consent. Catherine Porter has been covering the trial for the New York Times. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. What does this verdict mean for the country and for Madame Pellicotte?
Well, for Madame Pellicotte, it was the verdict she was looking for. But more than the verdict, she wanted to spark a large conversation in France about rape, the prevalence of rape, how the country treats rape victims. And by that measure, she's clearly succeeded. Her trial and her decision to make it public and force the country to look rape in the face by watching these videos of her comatose body being probed and penetrated by strangers has really started a national conversation about relationships between men and women, about consent, about rape culture. These type of conversations that were much more common in North America and after Me Too, but never really cracked here in France, are now fully taking place.
You have been at the court in Avignon since the beginning. What has the scene been like?
The response to the verdict, so that her husband, or ex-husband, Dominique Pellicot, was found guilty of the maximum 20 years in prison. The other men were all convicted, mostly of rape, but they were given sentences that were more lenient. On average, most of them were between 6 and 9 years in prison, and 6 of them walked free today because they'd already spent enough time in prison during the trial or before the trial that they had no more prison time. That infuriated quite a few of the feminists who have been following this case and very closely in Avignon. They said to me that they felt like the message was, you can get away with rape.
Why has this particular case resonated so deeply, not just within France, but really all around the world?
I think it's just an extraordinary case for so many reasons. This was a mass rape trial with 51 men, almost all of whom charged of rape, and all but one for raping the same woman. And in fact, these were people's next door neighbors. They range in age between 26 and 72. The French press were calling them Monsieur Tout le Monde, Mr. Everyman. And then there's Madame Pellicot's frankly courageous decision to cast a massive spotlight on her own intimate horror. She not only insisted that the trial be made public because she wanted to launch this conversation, but she then insisted that these videos her husband had taken, more than 20,000 of them were found by police, be aired in court so people could see them. As her lawyer said, she wanted France and the world to look rape in the eye.
There were so many striking moments during this trial. What was the response to Madame Pellicot's testimony?
Madame Pellicot took the stand early and then frequently throughout the trial, 3 times. She was incredibly poised every time, calm. She said that she thought shame should change sides, and truly she embodied that notion. She came in each day with her head held high, never cracked emotionally, and answered questions calmly and directly. And every time one of the lawyers would say, well, you could see how he might have thought. And she said, well, the instant he came into the room and he saw my body and heard my snores, he should have known to ask Madame Pellicot. And he should have turned around and left and called the police. And not one of these 50 men phoned the police.
A stunning trial with the verdict coming today. Catherine Porter, who's been covering it since the beginning, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
California Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency yesterday in response to bird flu that's spreading among that state's dairy cows. The virus has already caused the deaths of more than 120 million birds across the country since 2022. Stephanie Tsai reports now from Colorado on efforts to keep the dairy workforce safe, given concerns that the more the virus spreads, the greater the possibility that it mutates to allow spread among humans.
In this stretch of rural Colorado, Soraya Leone is a lifeline for many agricultural workers.
The farm workers and dairy workers, it's very hard. It's very hard to survive.
She's a community health worker with Project Protect, part of a statewide nonprofit. Her regular visits and food deliveries to farm workers in need now includes a bag full of face shields and masks, the equipment that protects them from bird flu. Since the spring, avian influenza has been spreading in dairy cattle and has infected about 60 farm workers nationwide. Despite the risks, this worker said he's gotten little information from his employer.
The owner, we never see him. They're not interested in us.
Speaking to us anonymously because he is undocumented, he told us earlier this year he was ill and had conjunctivitis. Commonly known as pink eye, the symptom is a sign of possible infection from this strain of bird flu.
On a statistic, we don't have too much people sick from this fever. But on the reality, many people got sick, but they never know because they never had information about what the symptoms are or how they feel.
Leon is part of a network of so-called promotores, established during COVID to help spread critical information to Colorado's many Hispanic farm workers. Lately, the Promotora network has shifted to addressing the threat from bird flu. Did workers get enough information when bird flu started circulating in this area over the summer?
Not really. The government response was too late. They know they have the sickness because the symptoms, the eyes and the cows. So now they know they got this sickness, but only because we provide information later. No before.
In addition to groups like Project Protect, a federally funded agricultural health and safety center at Colorado State University has been using social media to provide information to workers. While the virus, known as H5N1, has killed more than 100 million poultry birds and tens of thousands of marine mammals, in cows it has been less deadly, with most recovering after experiencing a drop in milk production. While at least one person has been hospitalized with bird flu, this recent strain of the virus circulating in cows has been relatively mild in humans, and the risk to the public remains low. But Colorado state veterinarian Maggie Baldwin and state epidemiologist Rachel Herlihy are watching the changes in the pathogen closely.
We've seen this virus move from species to species before. We've seen spillover of this virus from wild birds and from poultry to mammals, and particularly that's been wild mammals in the past. What's concerning is the mammal-to-mammal transmission of the virus right now.
While pasteurization has been shown to kill the virus in milk and dairy products, workers coming into contact with raw milk are at risk.
We know that the more opportunities that we give this virus to be exposed to people, the more opportunities it has to adapt potentially and then gain that ability to potentially spread from person to person. And that's, of course, what we want to prevent.
Since July, Colorado has mandated weekly bird flu testing of bulk milk samples from its licensed dairies.
Every week, we've seen fewer and fewer positives, which is fantastic news. But we really don't know what the long-term impact of this virus looks like. We know that, yes, the dairy cows do seem to build some level of an immune response, but we don't know if an infected herd could become reinfected. And dairy herds are constantly bringing in new replacement animals all the time.
Over the summer, more than half of the dairy herds in Colorado tested positive for avian influenza. While there hasn't been a positive case since August, there's still concern about dairy farm workers, many of whom are undocumented immigrants.
There really is very little support.
At a Mexican restaurant, we met one longtime dairy worker who also wanted to remain anonymous because of his immigration status.
Have companies given the right protections to farm workers to keep them safe?
There really weren't any measures taken. The only measure to avoid infection was when they washed the tires of the trailer trucks that arrived to drop off the feed. But as far as the personnel, I never saw them wearing any protective gear to avoid infection.
He described a friend who got sick and said the lack of paid sick leave makes workers hesitant to report their illnesses.
From the moment a worker gets sick and stops working, he doesn't get anything.
Community health worker Soraya Leon says there are also issues with access to clinics and the cost of care. Immigration status also plays a role in workers not getting tested.
Undocumented people, they don't say anything because they are afraid all the time.
Zach Riley with the Colorado Livestock Association says the industry has been a crucial partner with state officials in protecting animal and worker health.
There's been multiple free resources provided by the state and by employers to try to make sure that you are protected. I would say you would be hard pressed to find somebody not doing it.
I mean, we did speak to some farm workers who said without the help of these nonprofit organizations might not have had the information or the PPE at their disposal.
I would venture to guess that's a very limited case and very limited number of those. Any one of our producers would gladly tell you they're offering a whole treasure trove of things to their employees.
But despite efforts to reach out to several different cattle organizations, including Riley's, we couldn't find a Colorado dairy farmer to speak with us, some citing concerns around the potential spread of bird flu. In November, research from Colorado and Michigan confirmed what many people suspected. Antibody tests showed more farm workers had signs of previous bird flu infections.
That is not uncommon when it comes to infectious diseases because not everyone gets tested, but it does tell us that we still have work to do to protect humans from exposure.
Back at El Centenario Mexican restaurant, this dairy worker agreed that more support is needed.
Most people who work on dairy farms, most of us lack someone to tell us what guarantees we have. We are really lacking information.
While there haven't been recent cases of bird flu in Colorado dairy herds, the virus is continuing to spread widely in California cows. Earlier this month, federal ag regulators took Colorado's lead and announced mandatory milk testing for the first time, an acknowledgement that we are still a long ways from getting a handle on the spread of this disease. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai in Weld County, Colorado.
This week, we've been reporting on some promising treatments for two of the deadliest drugs in America, opioids and alcohol. William Brangham is back now with a conversation with one of the nation's leading researchers who is studying America's addictions and how we can better address them.
My next guest is one of the researchers who helped establish that addiction is, in fact, a brain disorder, that taking certain drugs over time can change how our brains actually work. Dr. Nora Volkov is the head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is part of the NIH, and is one of the world's biggest funders of research into drug abuse and addiction. Dr. Volkov, so good to have you on the program. We have been reporting on a few of the medications that show effectiveness for treating opioids and alcohol abuse disorders. And I wonder that from your long research on this topic, what role do you see medications playing in helping people address their addictions?
In the case of opioid use disorders, they've been crucial and they've been life-saving. And again, it's one of the drivers that is now reducing the number of people that are dying. So in the case of opioid addiction, we have very effective medications. The problems are, number one, that only a small percentage of people that would benefit from them, approximately 25%, will get prescribed this medication. Second problem is they start taking them and that protects them from overdosing. But at 6 months, 50% of them will stop taking their medication. So, and we only have three: buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone. So we need a wider variety of medication, and we need alternatives so that people that don't respond to one medication can have options that go beyond those three medications. And importantly, combinations of medications that may make it easier for patients to stay in treatment, because that's crucial for someone to have the long-lasting preventive effects of the medication treatments.
Why do we have so few medications? I mean, when you think about other disorders, we have 1 million blood pressure drugs and hypertension drugs, but so few for such a huge public health crisis.
This is not for the lack of not understanding and scientific developments. It is due to the level of interest, the lack of interest that pharmaceutical industry has had overall typically on the development of these medications. What are the issues why there has been limited interest? Number one, stigma. Addiction is a stigmatized disorder. How do we see it? In general, people feel comfortable with people that are addicted, but it's also stigmatized in that when you come to reimbursement as a physician, you are paid less if you take care of someone with an addiction than if you take care of someone with a depression. So there is discrimination on the way that we actually incentivize the willingness of a provider to participate in the process. So these are two extreme, big barriers that have made it very difficult for industry to say, okay, I'm going to go after that. And then the third element, it is very difficult to get these medications, if they show a signal, get approved by overall, because what is required for a medication to be approved by the FDA for addiction is that you achieve abstinence. And abstinence is an incredibly difficult goal to achieve. It's like say, okay, I'm not going to approve you a medication unless you show that the pain is completely gone or that depression is completely gone. But for these diseases, we approve medications if they reduce the magnitude.
As you know, there is a strong sentiment also in the recovery community that drugs are not the right use for drug addictions, that they believe this is what got us into the problem, let's not use them to get out of the problem. They argue abstinence is the only approach. What do you say to that argument?
Well, it's another factor that has made it much harder for certain individuals to get the treatment that could have saved their lives. We can be very categorical in the field of addiction. It's either this or that. And my perspective is many of these help groups that actually have done a lot of good, but are very intolerant of the use of medications, actually are curtailing the ability to actually have someone that can benefit from the medication and from the treatment support that these groups offer. The way that we think about addiction is very different from the way that we think about other disorders, because we account the person responsible for their acts. And as a result of that, we tend to be much more demanding of what they should do in order to actually achieve recovery.
On a different note, you've done some of the initial investigations into these widely popular drugs to treat obesity and diabetes, the Ozempics and Wegovy's, the GLP-1 drugs, as they are called. Those are also showing some promise in treating people's drug and alcohol use. How promising do you think those drugs really are?
Well, the data looks like they could potentially be quite transformative. So whether you are looking at the data from experiments in laboratory animals, for example, in rats, we've been funding research and they've actually shown consistently across different types of drugs, they prevent the animals from escalating into compulsive drug taking. They prevent them from relapsing. And we're seeing the anecdote reports from people saying, I don't have the same desire of drinking or smoking or taking cocaine. So it looks very promising. There are now ongoing randomized clinical trials, which are the gold standards for determining if, in fact, what is the level of efficacy and to bring them to the next level, which is to ultimately get the data that will result in an approval by the FDA of this as an indication for the treatment of addiction. That work is ongoing, but the preliminary findings overall look very promising.
All right, Dr. Nora Volkov of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we have an update to our lead story. House lawmakers are now voting on the stopgap spending measure that would avoid a partial government shutdown tomorrow night. It's clear the vote will not reach the two-thirds majority needed to pass, as more than 30 Republicans joined Democrats in voting no. President-elect Donald Trump urged Republicans to support this measure after his opposition to an earlier deal caused it to fall apart. It's unclear what the next steps will be. Remember, there's a lot more online, including a remembrance of a very special Santa Claus known as Santa Blair, who brought a lot of Christmas cheer to Oklahoma City and beyond. That's at pbs.org/newshour. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.